Today I'm speaking with Sasha Sagan. Sasha, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I really appreciate your doing this. And I just wanted to give everyone a brief bio for Sasha. Sasha is an author, a television producer, and a filmmaker. And her book that we're going to talk about a little bit later is called For Small Creatures Such as We, which I'll hold up here, a little publicity, published in 2019. And Sasha is the daughter of writer Anne Drian and astronomer Carl Sagan. And her husband, Jonathan, they have a daughter together. And Sasha is also a graduate of New York University with a degree in dramatic literature. And Sasha has written for New York Magazine, for the Oprah Magazine, Violet Book, and more. And she played the role of Carl Sagan's mother in Cosmos: Possible Worlds, which was cool. I'd seen that before, but I hadn't known to put the connection there. When I looked that up, I went back and was like, yeah, that's Sasha. And Sasha was one of the producers and screenplay writers for the short film Bastard in 2010. And her website is sashasagan.com. So Sasha, again, welcome. Besides what you do professionally, is there anything else you want to add of your hobbies or pastimes?
Oh, well, I have a almost 4-year-old daughter, so I spend a lot of time touring playgrounds and, and places like that. And yeah, it's funny. I don't know, when I think about my hobbies, I sort of overlaps with my work, reading and traveling when that was possible. I hope again soon, and just sort of getting, anything I'm interested in, it becomes a hobby.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was curious as we get started, could you just, we're going to go into your book a little bit later, but could you just tell us briefly what it's all about for anyone that hasn't picked it up yet?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's partly a social history. I'll give a little background. I grew up with my parents in a, very a scientific household. My father was a scientist, my mother's a science communicator, and they raised me with this kind of joy and awe and wonder about the natural world as revealed by science. And it's very much the same ethos that permeated their work, the television series Cosmos, and many books and essays. And that's the lens with which I see the world. And what I became interested in is, for those of us who are not religious, for those of us who see science as the pathway to more understanding about who we are and what we're doing here and what it's all about, how do we do the things that historically have been based in religion, but that each of us need: celebrations, rituals, traditions, holidays. And when I was 14, my dad died, and I started to really, have to come to grips with the idea of how do we go through grief and mourning if we're not religious, and what does that look like? And that sort of sent me on the path that many years later led to this book. And so I really became interested in researching the ways we mourn and celebrate and, process change. And what's so wonderful and what I found so joyous in my research was that sort of when you look beyond the first layer of the specifics of, cultural norms or, time and place and history, there's a kernel of a scientific phenomenon. Birth, coming of age, death are biological events. The changing of the seasons, the solstices and equinoxes are astronomical events. And throughout history, we have built our most important moments around those events. And so the book is an exploration of that, coupled with some of my experiences as a person growing up, and, having these two wonderful, fascinating people to have conversations with every day and show me a little window into this universe.
Yeah, it's awesome. I loved reading it. And by the way, I didn't read the subtitle, I don't think, but the subtitle is "Rituals for Finding Meaning in Our Unlikely World," and it really is. It's an amazing book going through the rituals that we all have, and it, I love how you talk a lot about patterns, finding patterns, and sometimes making patterns that aren't even there. But we do
Yes.
need some kind of structure and ritual, and I do want to dive into that a little bit more in a few minutes. But before I get too deep into some deep questions, I wanted to ask you about some of your stories. Could you share with us? I know I've read it now, but the story of how your mother's parents, Harry and Pearl, met. I thought that was such a cool story.
Yes. Oh, it is, I think about it all the time. They lived in New York City, and, if you've ever been to New York City or any large metropolis, and you think about how many trains, subway trains, how many cars there are in each train, how often the trains come through the station. And one day my grandfather Harry was sitting on the New York City subway reading what was then, I think, a very recently published book by William Faulkner, Absalom. And my grandmother happened to get in on that train, on that subway car, happened to sit in the empty seat next to him. And when he went to turn the page, she put her hand on his hand and said, "Wait, I'm not finished reading." She was peeking over his shoulder, and that was the connection that started
That's so
the
cool.
marriage and relationship that, I am here because she's got on that car. And it's one of those things that for people who believe that everything is predetermined, or that there's destiny, or that, everything happens for a reason, well, then that was inevitable and that was always going to happen. But for those of us who think that there is a lot of random chance that plays a part in any of us coming to be, any of our relatives going back, to the generations to, early humans and beyond, then all of these things had to happen just the way they did for you to be here right now. And they could have gone a different way. And to me, the chance that it could have gone differently is what makes it sacred, for lack of a better word. I could be somebody else. It wouldn't be me, but there would be, some other combination of genetic makeup that would be in this world. And I think that there's something about that is, so joyful and so beautiful when we think that crossing paths is unlikely. If it's meant to be, then it's not special.
Yeah.
In my opinion, if it could have gone differently and it happened this way and it was a 1 in a million shot and you're here and you're that to me is more beautiful and more profound. And so there's something about, and everyone has probably countless ancestors who crossed paths in a way that, could have gone differently. But there's something about that crystallizes just the way that the subway works and the way people get on and off and go about their business. It just crystallizes that phenomenon in a way that I find really beautiful.
Yeah, I love too that she took the risk, because I'm sure that was a brave act, at least for sure in that culture, and even today.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, this is like in, I have to ask my mother. I think I have it right in the book, but like in the early 1940s. And it's just, that was bold for sure. Still now. I mean, now that would be like if a girlfriend told me that she was on the subway and was reading over a guy's shoulder and put her hand on his hand and said that, I would be like, wow, good for you. And
yeah,
it's still bold.
Oh, that's so cool. And could you also, in terms of your family stories, your great-grandparents, Benjamin and Tilly, they were the ones whose son made the big change for you all, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us that story about that conversation and how it all started?
Yeah, well, actually, so Harry, the one reading the William Faulkner book, so around that same period of time in his life, his parents had come from Eastern Europe. They were Orthodox Jews. They, were true believers. They held, imagine, think of what it's like when you leave a world where, they lived in a community where everybody was the same, and they came to New York and, in a ship through Ellis Island, like many, many other people. And then in this new world, had literally and figuratively new world, had to, they kept up these customs in a world that was where it was not, so easy all the time to do so. And, they had left because they got out while the getting was still relatively good, but they had a sense that it was time to leave their home. And they started a new life in New York. And my grandfather was born in New York, and he grows up and he's American and he goes to college, first person in his family to go to college. And slowly his worldview starts to change. And, his horizons broadened. And he started to have some questions in his mind, that little seed, Tim, I know that the little seed of doubt that starts to grow. And one day he decided he had to tell his parents, and he took the subway, the aforementioned subway home from Manhattan. He was at NYU, so he took the train to Queens, and he found his father davening, praying, and he waited for him to finish very respectfully. And this is all, this is a story that was told to me, and this beautiful cinematic detail from my mother, who the story is passed down to her, but this is how I've always pictured it and how it was told to me. And his father looks up at him and he's so happy to see him. Oh, you're home. And Harry says, look, Dad, I've got to talk to you. And I just picture like that knot in your chest when you have to have a difficult conversation with someone you love, and how uncomfortable that is. And just like, I feel like I can feel it, through the eons. He said, I'm not going to go to shul anymore. I'm not going to keep Shabbat. I'm not going to keep kosher. I'm not going to do all of these things because I don't believe in God, and I'm not going to do any of this anymore. And you just like that feeling of bracing for what the response is going to be. And his father looked up at him and said, the only sin would be to pretend. And I so powerful, this idea that going through the motions to keep up something for everyone else that doesn't ring true to you, that is not fair, that the idea that it's like, and it also spoke so much about the idea that Benjamin was doing all of these rituals and, following all of these rules and living his life this way because that was what he wanted to do. And it was, important to him versus the weight of obligation. And I think once you're released from that feeling that you have to do things the way that your parents or ancestors did them, and you don't want to be the one who breaks the chain, for after 6,000 years or whatever it is in your tradition. I think that then, because Harry, it wasn't like he all of a sudden wasn't Jewish anymore. We still, and, on my father's side also, still carried on traditions in a different way. He really still identified, I still do, even though I'm totally secular, I really identify as being Jewish because it's a way for me to connect to people in my lineage who I don't know very much about, but I know that. The idea that you can, traditions have to, I love to say traditions have to mutate in order to survive. And I think for a lot of people, if you're forced to keep something going that doesn't really mean anything to you, or that feels oppressive or feels inaccurate, then when you let it go, I know a lot of people who want nothing to do with any of that. But I think when you say, look, if this isn't working for you, just do the thing that works for you. Sometimes little elements of it, holidays, cuisine, expressions, traditions, little rituals can be passed along in a way that doesn't feel like this heavy obligation. And, as a species, we have gone through many systems of belief and systems of behavior that we've eventually decided had to fall by the wayside in order for us to go forward. And I think that, that is the way of progress. And, everything that we think of as really traditional on the scale of human history is brand new. So we can let some of the guilt go because nothing is really that old when we take the cosmic perspective.
I think it's so cool that he gave him that, I guess the word would be grace or freedom.
Yeah.
Because so many stories you hear, they go the other way. And what an awesome gift to say,
yeah,
go where you feel is right and where your cognitive dissonance can be resolved. And
right.
What a cool gift to give to the next generation.
Right. And they were, for the rest of his parents' lives, my grandfather was extremely close with them, and that connection was preserved and was, a beautiful example of an adult child and his parents, especially as they aged, very, very close, happy relationship. And I think it's in part because there wasn't the tension between, okay, well, we believe this and you don't, it was okay. And the people I have known in my life who I think are, really true believers, they're not threatened by the doubt of others. I think people are uncomfortable. I mean, this is my own theory, and I'm sure that there are exceptions, but I suspect that people who have a little bit of doubt that they don't want to entertain, those are the people who cannot hear the doubt of others. People who feel totally comfortable and confident in their belief system, whatever anyone else believes is not a threat to them.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And the reality too of being able to say, you've kind of alluded to some in your book, I'm willing to be skeptical and say, let's take the truth wherever it carries us. And I remember for myself, that was one of the very first statements I made. And I had people, even loved ones, that were kind of shocked at it. But I said, I'm rethinking some things and I have no idea where this is going, but I just want to put this out there. I am more committed to the truth than to what I've believed so far. And if they end up being the same, great. If they don't, I'm going to go where the truth takes me. And there are some faith communities where that is very threatening, because it basically implies, it's almost like a terror management issue. Like, if you're telling me that I'm possibly not correct, then that implies things about, number one, my worldview, but number two, my relationship with the creator and the afterlife, all these issues that I've pretty much put to bed. I know that I know the truth of what's going to happen when I die. If you're telling me that maybe you're taking it a different path, you're basically passively attacking me and saying, no, that might not be what happens when you die. And that's a threat. And a lot of people just can't. It is hard to take it. It's a hard pill to swallow.
For sure. And that's true for all of us, right? Whether you're secular or religious or in between, like, being wrong, like that's unpleasant.
Yeah.
That
no matter what the topic.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a good feeling, especially if it's something that you have built your life around. It's not a good feeling. But I think that is what, to me, and this is, something that my parents really instilled in me, that what is so powerful and beautiful about the scientific method is that part of it is the stuff that we think is real right now. We always leave the door open an inch that more information, more data, more evidence might totally upend that. And that's good, right? Yeah. You are celebrated as a scientist if you totally turn the status quo on its head with evidence. If you can really prove it and completely change what everyone believes, like, that is heroic. And I think that that's what's so powerful. And, I think that idea that, actually, my mother has a postcard in her house that she bought at an auction. My parents bought at an auction many, many years ago. And the postcard says, for me, the whole of philosophy is truth at any cost. Warmly yours, M. Gandhi. And Muhammad Gandhi was a very religious person, but that idea that following the path to understanding, following the evidence, and coming face to face with whatever that is, that's so powerful. And I think that is how everything that we've been able to do as a species that has moved us forward, that has made things better, is because we've been willing to follow the evidence. I think not because we've been willing to believe things because they made us feel good, Yeah,
it's a great point too, to bring up a couple of quotes of yours. You said in your book, it's dangerous to believe things just because we want them to be true. This next one, quoting your father, we humans have a tendency to fool ourselves. And my parents taught me that there has never been any correlation between how true something was and how fervently it was believed. And there are certainly things we believe right now that will someday be revealed to be hilariously or abhorrently ignorant. Our understanding changes with new information, or at least it ought to. And what a great mentality. And also, I think it brings into this bigger equation besides religion, just the joy of life and discovery. Because so many people, I'm sure you've had this, but people who are neck deep in religion, which I was one of them, in my faith, not religion, but relationship with Christ. I would have said it wasn't a religion, it was a relationship. But once you get out, there's this first sense of like, where's my grounding. Like, what am I standing on now? And there are even people that I've spoken to and have shared with me that they feel like if this isn't true, if my relationship with Jesus isn't true, then I don't know that I even want to live. And you're like, whoa, this thing did a real mind job on you that you don't even want to live anymore if this mythology isn't real. But just to be able to go out and say, this universe is amazing and I wanted to discover it. And the reality that we're living in a really amazing time. I mean, just to think, if we all live long enough, what's the James Webb going to tell us? And what's the next one going to tell us? And, it's such a cool time to be alive and to have that mentality of the joy of life. And this would be a really good time for me to ask you about something else. I was going to put this later, but it's weaving in really well. Contact.
Yes.
I loved that movie. I watched it several times when it came out. You come across to me as partially reminding me of the Ellie character.
Oh,
and I was curious.
Thank you. That's so nice.
Well, I was curious if you would agree with that, and I wanted to maybe give a few thoughts here. She says in one section of it, this is the Eleanor Arroway character, what's more likely that an all-powerful, mysterious God created the universe and decided not to give us any proof of his existence, or that he simply doesn't exist at all, and that we created him so that we wouldn't have to feel so small and alone, which brings it right back to your book title, First Creatures, Small Creatures Such as We, that we do feel alone in this world.
Yeah.
And did that character influence you at all?
Well, I think that it's that, in a funny way, she and I are both daughters of the same dad, you know what I mean? Like he wrote this character with my, together with my mom and he's my dad. And so I think that he gave us some similar, he influenced us similarly. And that book, the book and the movie are, so much about a father-daughter relationship. And it's funny, someone was asking me just recently, like, when was the last time you watched that movie or read that book? And it's been many years. And I think it's maybe time for me to revisit it sometime because it is so much about a father-daughter relationship. And the book is dedicated to me. And it says for Alexandra, Sasha's the, Russian nickname for Alexandra, who comes of age with the millennium, may we leave her generation a better one than the one we were given. And, I think about that a lot. And the title of my book comes from a line in Contact, which the rest of the line is, for small creatures such as we, the vastness is bearable only through love. And, that idea that once you get through to the other side of the existential crisis, and whether you were raised religiously or secular or, any of the above, I think many people have the experience of life is short. We are here for an instant. We're on a tiny planet, revolving around an out of the way star in a, galaxy in a universe that goes on beyond our possible comprehension, and we are here for a split second and we have no evidence that there is anything afterwards. And it is really that's that feeling of oh my goodness, that's so stressful and scary. That's real. But I think on the other side of that freak out, which is totally valid and understandable, and I've been there, I think the other side of it is, well, then what do we have? And it's that we are here at all in this moment with other, people that we love, that we care about, our family, our spouse, our children, our, best friends, other members of our community, and we can widen it enough to think of ourselves as members of a 7.5, 8 billion person tribe where we are all in this little lifeboat together. Once we zoom out far enough and we can see that the differences between us that here on the ground seem really dramatic are completely insignificant, almost would be impossible to even detect if you were arriving from somewhere else. And I think that, that is the crux of it. And I think that is, so much of that is the message of not only Contact, but so many movies and books in that genre, and I think that, the parallels between my philosophy and Ellie Arroway's philosophy are just that we are products of the same parents in a funny way.
Yeah. Well, I love that you brought in the whole idea of an existential crisis, because it does seem like for a lot of people that that aspect of it is both alarming, but also it's humbling, and it brings you back to reality that number one, space and time are extremely vast, and
Hmm.
we are in a small piece of it. And we probably don't even have a fraction of a clue of how vast that really is. But as much as we can try, we know we're part of something much bigger than ourselves. And as your dad had said, we're just a pale blue dot in this
Hmm.
grand scheme of things. And then you think, in addition, the whole fear factor of like, what if an asteroid the size of the moon
Yeah.
hits us in 5 years, whatever? All of human history, that everything that's meant so much to us is just gone. That crisis of why is there something rather than nothing? Where are we going? And what if it just all ends? Do I have any meaning and purpose? I think it made me think of the movie, because she's looking for this hidden message, constantly looking. Like, she's very scientific, and I love this scene where in the movie where they're listening to just the audio, and then
Yeah.
the guy that is blind, he's listening to it and cranking it up, and he's saying there's a whole lot more here, and he's
Yeah.
just blasting it. And it's almost like you're saying with your book, like, there is a lot more here. We're not just a rock in space. There's more to this. And I think it's a struggle to figure out how to put that all together, knowing that
Yeah.
all the pieces I mentioned before. How do you think about that?
Well, it's almost like we have this, like, maybe this is too strong a word, but it's almost like we have this like fetishism about something being eternal in order for it to be worthy and valid. Like we have like something, if it ends, it's not like as good as if it, and I just think that that's right. I mean, right, you have a meal, you, whatever it is, you love someone and they die. It's not like, oh, that's meaningless and not a positive experience because it comes to an end. Or you have something, you have a fantastic vacation and then it's a week is over and you come home. And like this idea that we have to keep something going eternally in order for it to be beautiful and meaningful and reassuring even is so fascinating, right? We have this aversion. I mean, a part of it is just mortality is it's such a taboo topic. It's such a, and for people who believe there is an afterlife, well, what we're doing right now is still going to end, right? It might, even if you believe there's something else coming, it's going to be different, right? And I think the more that we really come face to face with this idea that this is not forever, it seems very painful, and at times it is very painful, but there's another element, which is that it highlights the beauty and the thrill of being here right now. And if it was forever, if it was just this world we're in right now, talking to people on Zoom, doing our taxes, that kind of stuff. Like it was just, this was forever. It would be meaningless, right? It's the contrast is what makes it special. And I think that, it's like night, right? Day is nothing if we don't know what night is, all of these things, it's the contrast that makes it beautiful. And I think that embracing that and embracing the horrible, sad parts too, and the heartbreak when you lose someone you love, that's real. And I think that shying away from that it robs us of so much. And like this idea that this is just the dress rehearsal and there's something else coming later that's better, I think that makes this so much less special. And to me, this is the show. We're here right now and nothing is guaranteed, for another day. But the more we can find this beauty and joy in this, the better. And there's no harm in that, right? Even if, you live to be 120 years old, right? There's no harm in taking each day as a joyful gift. And I think that, there's just so much there where the less we talk about mortality and the less we talk about death in society. And I think that, it's really a taboo topic. I was saying in another interview recently, like I have a friend who like if you bring up anything that is even like remotely to do with acknowledging that life does not go on forever, like something like oh, we're getting life insurance or something like that. She'll say like, not to be morbid or anything. And it's like, that's not morbid. Like morbid is like, I don't know, like some like true crime, like stuff, you know what I mean? It's like, it's just, it's real. It's not, it doesn't go on forever. And I think that the more we can talk about it and the more that we can, make it part of our awareness and not just put it out of our heads, because deep down, putting stuff out of our heads, ignoring things, it doesn't work. It never works, right? It just comes roaring back at another time. And I think that that there's, and this is something that in secular culture, I think we could do a lot better. It's very awkward. People don't know what to say when someone dies. If you don't think that, if you're religious, there's parameters of like social norms of things to say at a funeral, something like that. And I think people who are secular really struggle with what to say or how to deal with it because we don't have a, culture around it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it also is such a good point too, to say that if we, in my opinion, just deceive people into thinking that mythologies are correct, we're often depriving them of the ability to really embrace this life. And I feel bad too, even for the people who have lost someone, but they know that they're going to see them in heaven. It's almost like we've deprived them of the true grief, because there's almost like if they kind of realize later that they've been in mythology like I did, and that they then leave it, it's almost like you have to re-grieve, like, oh, I grieved, but only this partial grief, knowing I'm going to see that person again. And it's like you have to restart the grief thinking, no, their life has completed. And that's right. Like, period, end of story.
Right.
And that's a hard pill to swallow if you're not used to it. And it kind of shakes you up at first. And I described to people when I had my deconversion, which was almost 2 years ago, I was sitting right here at this computer, and I'd been studying for about 18 months. I mean, studying the origins of Christianity and Judaism in great detail. And up until probably the last month, if someone had said, you're going to end up being an atheist if you don't stop this process, I would have said, there's no way. Atheism is not, that's just ridiculous and probably even stupid. And just, there's no way. But at a certain point, it just all came together. And I was sitting here, and within an hour or less, I was fully deconverted. And it felt like someone strapped me in front of a fire hydrant and just opened it up, and I couldn't move. And it just, within an hour, I was fully gone in every way, fully deconverted. And it's like, it reminds me of that picture, the idea in the Matrix where they're first teaching Neo how to learn like jujitsu, and they jack him in, and like they pushed a button, and in 10 or 20 seconds, he's like jujitsu master, and he's like, oh my goodness, like what was that? Like, and it's like, but it's like, you're like, that's what it feels like. You become, but it also is cool because you become much more in control of your life now, because you're like, okay, I don't have a God. You said the whole, people being predestined to do things, and things are predetermined that you're going to be this way. Like, no, there's nobody pulling the strings. There's no puppet master. You control it to, not that you can control every aspect of your life, but you do have the decision-making power to say, I will be good, not because I fear hell or because I want to honor God. I'm just going to be good because I choose to. I take that power.
Right.
And what a cool thing to give, a gift to give to yourself and to the future generations.
Absolutely. I'm so curious. I know you're interviewing me, but I have so many questions for you. What did the trick? That was there one specific thing that day when you when you were deconverted in an hour, was there one piece of information or one idea that did it?
I would say there was a quote from someone else, and then there was general information that I was just getting. The quote that started it really probably in the last month before I deconverted, Ricky Gervais, he's an outspoken atheist. Yeah. He was being interviewed by somebody, and somebody said something like, what do you think about the Bible? And he started out with something like, well, it's obviously a man-made book. And then he went on to say something else about it. But as soon as he said it, like my mind just grabbed that, and like his implication was, it's just a man-made book. It's nothing divine. It's just man-made. When he said that, I was like, I think I might kind of agree with that. And that's for a devout Christian, that's blasphemy. But what really took it over the edge for me was a very serious study of where it came from, finding out, for example, like when you read the New Testament, have you read the New Testament?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
I went to Bible college to be a minister. I went to mission school to be a Bible translator in a jungle tribal environment. I'd memorized thousands of verses. And what took me over was realizing that a whole bunch of the New Testament is just copied from other sources. For example, I didn't realize that a whole bunch of Luke and Acts is a rewrite of the Iliad and the Odyssey. That the Gospel of Mark is structured according to the signs of the zodiac, which is interesting. You talked about, we're talking about the equinoxes. There's a lot of other astrological things in there. Realizing Pythagoras is in there with John 21, 153 fish. Jesus has them pull out the net of fish, and they count exactly 153 fish, which is a Pythagorean magic number. Finding out the Essenes were Pythagoreans. Finding out that Jesus was quoting Plato and Aristotle and other people. Right, and you're reading the Sermon on the Mount, you're thinking this is Jesus, and it's Plato. And that's one of my big projects, is to just document all that, and it's well over 1,000 times I'm seeing, and I know that a lot of religious, a lot of Christians still honor the Book of Enoch, but for Protestants, Enoch is like people don't even talk about Enoch, but to find out the Book of Enoch's quoted in the New Testament at least 100 times. And so again, people think they're reading Paul, they're reading Jesus, they're reading somebody else, and they don't know it. And that stuff in detail, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, but that stuff just eventually wore me down. And I kind of described it as like, if you have a bunch of dominoes and you're a mile away, you can kick as much as you want and you're not kicking them down, but you finally make that one last step, you're close enough and you kick it and they all just fall.
Right.
And that's what my experience was like.
That's so interesting. One of the things that, as I've done press for this book, and I've been interviewed by a few, handful of religious publications or podcasters, which I love doing and I'm very open to. One of the things that has been so interesting is, in the book, for those who haven't read it, I talk about my nanny who lived with us, who I grew up with, Maruha Farhe, who was a devout Roman Catholic, and she didn't drive, so my mom would drive her to church every Sunday. And sometimes if we were traveling or something, she would take me to church with her, which I loved. And I like, getting dressed up and ornate architecture and things like that. And special occasions, and my parents really felt strongly, that the more I understood about what people believed in the world, the better. And I knew that what she believed and what my parents believed was totally different, and that was fine. And one of the things that in interviews with religious, interviewers, that's been the source of so much surprise, that there was no censorship. And my parents would have felt that I was not properly educated if I did not know at least the basic theology of the major world religions. That would be a huge blind spot if I was, going to be a well-rounded person. And I think that that is something that is, I don't know, that was really revealing to me, that people would have expected. And I had a wooden set of Noah's Ark, animals and stuff and things like that. And my parents, were respectful in how they described it, but they, would say this is not supported by evidence. And I think that, or we sometimes say, well, there is evidence of a great flood, but unlikely that this is, that there was such an ark, et cetera. But I think that that's something that's really powerful, is this idea that, anything that's true can stand up to scrutiny. And if my parents felt my parents weren't worried that if I was exposed to Christianity, or, we're Jewish, but not religious, if I was exposed to religious or anything, Islam, Hinduism, any religion, it wasn't a threat to them, because they just felt that anything that they believed that, couldn't be, that there were, if I couldn't learn about other cultures and other belief systems, I wouldn't understand the way the world works, and that anything that they believed that I had questions about, the more the merrier. And I think that there's something about that is really powerful. And there's just the idea that read as much as you can about everything, including people who disagree with you. And then if your beliefs if you feel more strongly in what you already believe, then all the better. But if not, how important to have access to a pathway that might lead you to something that is better supported by evidence.
Yeah. And it really brings up to the point of, is it really fair for people to base their entire worldviews on a lack of information. Like I painted some time in my chats with people is if there's a table of if you're going to put your faith and your worldview in this system of belief, don't tell me 5%. And if you have any idea there's another 95% out there that you are not telling us. If you're going to tell us, for example, the Noah story, tell us about Gilgamesh too.
Right.
Tell us all these things.
Right.
Give us the full thing, and then say, now that you know as much as we can about this, feel free to make your own choice, as opposed to here's 5%,
Right.
ignore the man behind the curtain, just believe me, this is true. And that's it feels like that's my big passion, is just to give people that sense of there's a lot more information. You can do with it what you want, but I'm going to do my best to share what I've learned. I feel like
Right.
I'm not some genius, but I'm a beggar who knows where to find the bread, and I've been able to find more and more bread. And I'm like, I just want to share with people what I know, and let them make their own decision. But I since we're talking about faith, I had some other questions too in this, but I wanted to ask, this is a question that's been on my mind, not just for this interview, but it's been on my mind literally for probably decades at this point since I saw the movie. Christians would say, and I'm sure you've heard this, but Christians would say, I don't care what you tell me about this subject or that subject. Meaning, like, I don't care what you tell me about the evidence for evolution or the age of the earth or where the Bible came from. I had an experience.
Right.
I know that I know because I have seen the power of God. I've seen the miracles. And I want to just read this quote. This is from Contact. This will probably be my last question from Contact. But Ellie says at the end, I had an experience. I can't prove it. I can't even explain it. But everything that I know as a human being, everything that I am tells me that it was real. I was given something wonderful, something that changed me forever, a vision of the universe that tells us undeniably how tiny and insignificant and how rare and precious we all are, a vision that tells us we belong to something that is greater than ourselves, that we are not, and that none of us are alone. So I think I misquoted that at the end there, but the idea at the beginning of, I had an experience.
Right.
You can't tell me I didn't go to this other planet. I know it. And I was shocked when I saw that it was from your parents, because I thought that sounds contradictory to what I would have thought they would have wanted to end it on. And I was wondering if you've ever had a conversation about that, or just how you see it now.
Well, my mom would be a better person to ask about that. But I think it's like, Ellie, every scientist is still a human being, right? Ellie, we are still, pattern recognition junkies, and we still are experiencing the world in this imperfect, ship that we're all in individually with our five senses and with this, brain that is, gets us around okay, but it's not a foolproof system. And I think that that's part of it too. Every one of us, no matter how secular or scientific or, methodical, we are still operating with this system that really looks for patterns and looks to find them and wants, and we believe what our eyes show us. But I think what's so amazing is that, the revelation that she has about our tininess and the vastness, that is also substantiated by other evidence. And I think that's the crux of it. We are so, right, certainly we all agree that our eyes deceive us sometimes, and we see things that are not there, and we misremember things. I mean, of course we all do. And so, people in my life, I have two close friends, a couple in particular who are very devoutly Christian. And one day I asked them a question that I always wonder, which is, once you take the step of having faith and you're going on faith rather than evidence as your belief system, how do you know which one, right? There are so many choices. There are so many permutations. There are so many, denominations. How do you know which one is the one right, true one? And the wife and the couple said, you just have a feeling, it's just an emotional, internal feeling. And I think that's a very honest answer, but it's also, we have, right? Everyone has had the experience of having a gut reaction that didn't turn out to be right, positive or negative. Everybody has had a, I don't know, when you're like, someone doesn't pick up the phone and you have this sinking feeling, oh no, something's wrong, something happened. And then they were like, I was in the bathroom or whatever. You know what I mean? Like we've all had emotional responses. And listen, emotions are very useful and important. And I don't want to say like, oh, you know, we can only listen to the logical part of your brain. Like emotions are a central part of the experience of being alive and they're important. But they're not 100%. And I don't know. I think that there's something really interesting about this, where you know, where we draw the line between how we get our information and how we ask ourselves and question ourselves. I mean, that's one of the things is it's really about asking difficult questions. And I think from early childhood, I mean, one of the things I am most grateful to my parents about is that they loved difficult questions and they loved the like, my daughter is now in the phase of like, why? I know you have kids too. And like this idea of like, just, and you know, sometimes there is like a point where you just are like, I literally don't know the answer. But I want to like really keep encouraging her to ask the questions and feel like me not knowing the answer is fine. That's okay. And if it's something that we can like Google, we will. And if not, you know, there's maybe someday we'll understand the answer to it. But I think that there's something really powerful about allowing children and encouraging children to ask questions from early childhood and embracing that. And I think that sometimes it's a lot harder for adults to think critically when they have been discouraged from like toddlerhood for asking hard questions. And I think that sometimes they're discouraged by the adults. Sometimes they're discouraged because it's just inconvenient and you're like, you got to get where you're going, like put your shoes on, we got to get out the door. But sometimes it's because the adults around don't want to reckon with their either shame about not knowing something or some kind of internal tension that they're struggling with. And so the child has to pay the price by being told, don't ask. And I think the more that we encourage critical thinking in children, that makes adults who are more able to, there's a very loud airplane going by, sorry. I'll go back. But the more that we can encourage small children to ask really difficult questions, the more we have a generation of adults who are less likely to be fooled. And I don't just mean in terms of religious, you know, doctrine or anything like that, but in all the ways, I mean, like an infomercial, I don't know, like, you know, everything that's out in the world that seems good, but maybe isn't.
Yeah. And the gift, just the beautiful gift that is of saying too, in the bigger context, like, I want to give you all the information and I will not threaten you if you disagree with me. Like you don't have to grow up to be an atheist. You don't have to grow up to be a Christian. You can do what you believe in. What a cool gift. And in that context for just that your ability to discover the universe, to thrive without any sense of you have to agree with me, or not just, well, I potentially shun you or look down on you, but there's a daddy in the sky who's going to be very angry and there will be a day of reckoning. One last question about space, not about the contact maybe, but just more of a fun question. How do you think it would affect humanity if we did ever get contacted by another planet, another race of people on another planet? Do you think we would, with our religious overtones, be able to deal with it at this point?
Well, I think it would be a Rorschach test, right? It's like, and I think that's true for a lot of things that happen in the world, right? It's like, it's a mirror. If you're looking for a reason to like, you know, start a war, you're going to find it. If you're looking for a reason to come together, you're going to find it, you know? And I think that, you know, it would be really, I mean, there's a whole genre of art that is about this question, you know, what would happen? Best case scenario would be that it would allow us to see ourselves as one species, one planet, you know, life on Earth, even cross species, that we are the same and we're in it together. And, you know, that is like the theme of every like great and terrible sci-fi movie. I mean, maybe not everyone, but so many of them, right? It's the idea that like, well, we have to unite against these invaders. But, hopefully it could teach us how we could, get past this adolescence as a species where we have so much technology, but so little wisdom sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I was curious, a few questions focusing on religion, if it's okay.
Yeah.
When you found out, you mentioned having friends that are Christians. When you
Yeah.
found out what some people believe, I'm sure you weren't per se intentionally sheltered, but you weren't obviously indoctrinated into a faith. When you started to find out what people believed, such as hearing stuff about what I would consider the more extreme messages, such as God is angry at you, and you do have a sin problem, and if you don't have that sin problem dealt with, there is going to be a very, very sad outcome in eternity. Things like you need to eat Christ's flesh and drink his blood. If you ever went to a worship service or watched a video of it, you hear people singing stuff like, Jesus, your blood is so precious to me. Your death and resurrection is what sets me free. What is your response when you hear people in those kind of things, especially the stuff that's more what I would call the bizarro stuff?
Right. Well, I mean, Christianity, it's quite popular, and I grew up in the United States, and I was not sheltered from it. And Maruha, I mean, it's not like, I mean, it's in the ether, or what I mean? Like, it's not like, I don't remember having like a moment where I was like, wait, what? Of course there are specific things that like come as a surprise, and like, I guess it's almost like my parents like really, I have a certain like anthropological curiosity in general. And so when you learn something about a different belief system or culture, of course, all of us have our own prejudices about, oh, well, what I do is normal, you know what I mean? And whatever it else does is so weird, we all have that. But I don't know. I don't have like a clear like moment of like, oh my goodness, that doesn't make any sense, And it's if you're a member of a group that's the minority, being culturally Jewish or being secular, I mean, less and less that's the minority, but certainly in the 80s and 90s growing up, it was not as mainstream maybe as it is now. And you're saying the Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God. Every time anybody in government speaks, they're talking about God. You don't feel like I was aware, that this is what the rest of or it felt to me like this is what the rest of the culture believes. And of course, there's shades of gray, and there are people who are, extremists, as there are in every system of belief, including atheists, I would say. And there are people who are sort of like culturally going through the motions and do Christmas, and, and I just think that awareness of that range and not lumping everyone who has one belief system together, you're going to know there's a bell curve, right? There's going to be people who have really, really extreme perspectives in any worldview. And I was aware, like stuff where you like sort of hear about like, speaking in tongues and things like that, and think, oh, wow, that's outside of the norm. But I don't know. I think that when you sort of, I don't know. I always felt like, to learn about something like that, and to learn about something that, somebody was doing on the other side of the planet 1,000 years ago, to see it through the same lens and not have like the chauvinism of proximity in time and space, and, say, okay, well, we've been doing weird stuff for a long time as a species.
Yeah, it's very true. It's a good point. It keeps us humble as we try to. I think a lot of us are admitting that we left a fundamentalist perspective, and we need to make sure we don't accidentally become just fundamentalist atheists as well.
Overcorrect. Right. And I think that's something that is really valuable, because I mean, I don't really even call myself an atheist. I think of myself as secular, and my position is just, I withhold belief without evidence. I'm not saying I know for sure X, Y, and Z does not exist. I'm just saying that if there's not, tangible, demonstrable evidence, how can I possibly then anything that it doesn't have evidence to support it is equally unlikely from my perspective.
Yeah, exactly. I was curious with you having some Christian friends and, you know, college and all that, have you ever seen anybody that's come to you and said, I was religious and I think I might be leaving it? Has anyone ever kind of talked through that process with you personally?
Oh, that's so interesting. I know a lot of people who, by the time I met them, had been religious, and were like, "Oh, I used to be really religious, and I'm not anymore." And I have some friends who I think have become more religious in the time that I've known them. But yeah, actually, I do have one friend who comes to mind who was brought up very religiously Jewish, and she has over the years softened her positions, but so much of it was cultural. And I think that is a really that's a really specific thing. I think so often people, even when the theology doesn't add up, they don't want to leave the feeling of belonging in a group. You know, they don't want to feel like, you know, apart from their community that they grew up with, and apart from the, you know, and that's what I do admire so much about religion, is this idea of this community that lifts you up. You know, when there's a wedding, when there's a coming of age ceremony, when someone has a, you know, problem, everyone comes together. And, you know, when someone dies, everyone's there to cook a meal and help. And I think that in the secular world, we have to make that for ourselves. And because there's not a central location and weekly appointment, it's different and it's harder, and you have to carve it out for yourself in a way that takes a lot of effort and work. And I think that the idea of leaving a community, even after the theology has already, you know, you've already sort of gotten beyond that, I think that so often the people I've known, it's like the struggle is just like, well, then what am I going to, like, who's going to be my group to like go through all the stuff with?
Yeah. Well, your point there is, it's the other side of it that's really fascinating is Christians, which is, I'm talking about my background here, but
yeah,
religious people don't often see that from the other side, in the sense of, they knew that I had a lot to lose if I left.
right.
It's that you have so much to gain if you just stay put and toe the party line. If you leave, all kinds of bad things happen. And yet you still left. You must have had some really good reason to make that wager worth it. What would make such a gamble okay to you? What did you find out that I don't know? And you know, of course, you get the party lines like, oh, you just wanted to sin. Oh, you were never really a Christian in the first place. You know, you were just like a cultural Christian, but you weren't really a Christian because a real Christian would never leave. All that kind of stuff. But you know, just the people that are more willing to be less party line and more honest. Like, I had pretty much nobody that ever said to me so far, even after 2 years, why did you leave? Like, you knew so much, so many thousands of verses, so connected to churches, so connected to ministries. Why would you leave such a cool thing? And that's, I think a lot of atheists that I've talked to, people who've deconverted, are very shocked that people just, they don't care. It's like you get this brand of like, you're kind of a traitor, and
Right.
I don't really care why you left. You're a traitor, so, you know, go do your thing, but I'm not interested.
Or I'm afraid to hear your answer because I don't want to leave.
Yes.
Or I don't want to leave, right? And I think that's the thing. It's like, well, what's the answer to, well, what did you get if you lost so much? It's like peace of mind, and just like that nagging feeling of the cognitive dissonance, you know, that's, I think for so many people, right, that's the, you know, I think about friends who I have who grew up very devoutly Christian, and who, once they were, you know, 11 or 12, realized they were gay and had to go through this very long, painful process of reckoning with both of these ideas, and finally coming to a place where they could leave and be out and proud and joyful and have their life as adults. And I think that it's like, you know, the thing that you sacrifice by staying is just that, like, getting rid of that gnawing feeling that like something is wrong. And there's just no, like, you can't live like that. People do. I know people do, but it's there's not, I think that, people, you can't ever really fully have peace when you have that part of your brain that knows something's not adding up.
Yeah. Well, that is a great segue to one of my last couple of questions here. You asked me before what made me leave, and I wanted to ask you a question about something that, looking back, I think should have made me leave, but did not. And I say that to my shame. But when you look at the Bible, I'm going to read a couple things here and then pass it back to you. You find at first some strange stuff like talking snakes and donkeys, the sun standing still, bread falling from heaven, the sea parting, flat earth, the earth being on top of pillars. But then you start to add some strange and some bad stuff. And this is where my question is going to get to. Genital mutilation, blood magic, scapegoating, favoritism, tribalism, discrimination, mass murder, slavery, genocide, warmongering, a lot of bloodthirsty mentalities, making prisoners of war, permanent prisoners of war, ethnic cleansing, hate crimes, lynchings, lots of violence and brutality. There's one scene where King David has to kill 200 men and cut off the end of their foreskin there to get his wife. He's kicking out lepers and unclean women, blaming blindness on sin. At one point, there's a man who offers his daughters to be raped, and he's later called a righteous man, a man named Lot. Stories about killing gay people, lots of misogyny and sexism, stoning. There's a verse that talks about how blessed the person will be who dashes babies' heads on the rocks if they're the babies of your enemies.
Right.
Victim blaming, such as you did deserve this genocide because of your sin. Sections about where if your daughter gets raped, all the man that raped all he has to do is basically give you some shekels, and that woman has to become your wife. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of bad stuff there. And my question is, two questions. Does it scare you that we as humans are so willing to put up with this stuff, and even to not just say, oh, well, it's okay, I'll defend it, I'll defend this God. Right. And then secondarily, why do you think people can't see past that and say, like, I'm even to myself, why can't we say this is really nasty stuff?
Right. I know. It does scare me. It does scare me. And also the idea that there's nothing in there that people didn't know at the time. You know what I mean? Like if there was like a line that was like, oh, there were like these great lizard beasts and I smited them so that you could whatever. And like, then people found, dinosaur fossils or something like that. But, oh, like there's nothing in there that was beyond what people, it's just obviously such a reflection of the world in which it was written by human beings. It's the world of the human beings, right? There is no perspective larger than the earthlings. And yeah, it does scare me. And I think that it's right. It's because, right. Imagine, you don't have to imagine, but like growing up, generation upon generations of people growing up being told this is the best thing ever. This is what is our, measuring stick for what is right and good. And then, you get old enough to be able to read and say, what's this part? And and of course that skews your worldview. If you're told this is the end all be all of goodness and righteousness, and it's filled with abuse and xenophobia and misogyny and homophobia and murder and war, how can, right? It's really hard to leave that, and lack of questioning, right? It's also don't question God, don't, right? No Socratic method stuff, none of that is encouraged. And I think it's like, well, then is it really, and I'm not blaming this like solely on Christianity or solely on religion. We have a long history of problems as a species, right? And I'm not saying like, oh, if everyone was secular, the world would be perfect. That's not my position.
Sure.
But it does underscore some of the worst in us. And when we celebrate that, instead of saying we are imperfect, right? That part I agree with, but the stuff that's not great about us is not like, lust, in my opinion. It's like this violence and xenophobia and inability to see someone who's different than you as just as worthy of being able to do their thing as you are. I think that, when we don't ask ourselves hard questions and we don't look at the ways that we have been over the centuries and eons and say, how could we improve? And we just hold up our past failings as this, model, we just are going to keep repeating the worst in us over and over again. And when we don't ask ourselves the deep questions of how do I know that what I've been taught is true, that leads us down a path that I really think creates so many problems for our little species. But I also think that we are capable of moving forward, and we are capable of shaking off some of the qualities that have been the source of so much pain and heartbreak. And we do have the ability to improve. And, sometimes we feel this obligation to keep up these traditions and rituals that are toxic because we think of them as so ancient and so central to our history. But moving forward, we can do so much better. And the only things that are really traditional that we do are, cooking meals together, raising children, looking up at the night sky, wondering what we're doing here. Like, will you go back far enough, no matter what your background, no matter what your ancestors believed? That's the stuff that is really ancient and really traditional and really human. And I think everything else, we just have to look at on a case-by-case basis and see, is this serving us? Is this useful? Is this good? Is this make a better world or a worse one?
That's awesome. I love that perspective. You mentioned the word lust, and this will bring me to my last question here as we wrap up. The word lust is related, obviously, to the idea of sexuality, and you talk about it in an entire chapter of your book. I'm sure when people speak about leaving religion, one of the most common aspects that people bring up is the feelings of shame that they used to have, that they lose them. And why do you think we're so quick to connect sexuality and eroticism with this sense of sin and shame? And you talk in your book about our biological urges being stronger than our taboos, which is interesting to bring in. And you have this great story where you talk about your relationship with Jonathan, and I love how you bring in the alcohol in that story.
Yeah.
Alcohol moved it forward. But why do we? Last question: why do we bring so much shame into this, and how do we make sex an awesome thing that's free of this taboo?
It's such a good question. Well, I think, sex education that is just frank and honest and straightforward in middle schools, from sea to shining sea would be great. But also this idea, I think the reason that we, around the world, whether it's, encouragement or discouragement or these, bylaws and micromanagement of the ways people do this, I think it's because it's this thing that is so powerful. And, it's like a, force of nature. It's magnificent. It's beautiful. It can be dangerous, right? And we feel ourselves lose control. And why are there almost 8 billion people in the world? Because the system works. People like doing it, right? Yeah. And it's like, I think we get so swept up in the power of it that there have been, anyone in a position of power through the generations has tried to make up rules. And of course, we are afraid of things that we cannot control. We are afraid when we feel that we are losing our ability to make clear decisions, And I think that just, the problem is when you make something totally forbidden, or, outside of marriage and only for procreation and blah, 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 it's, first of all, it's not effective. Obviously, people still do it. And if people don't have information, they really can make problems that are serious and spread disease. And, obviously, there's lots of ways in which it can be a problem. And I'm sure thousands of years ago, same as laws about what not to eat, it was like a public health thing, on some level, that they thought this was the most effective way to just try to stem some of the spread of disease. But I think, it's like anything else. Once we see nature as something beautiful and wonderful, and once we see our place in the universe and biology and astronomy and all of these elements of nature as something sacred and beautiful, we can have a better relationship with it. And, straightforwardness, frankness, honesty, and actually just look at the evidence and say, be careful about this. This is great. Enjoy. And I think that there's so much there that, when you grow up and you're told something is bad, it's really hard to undo that, unring that bell. And so I hope that there will eventually be a generation of children who get a good, middle school sex education and can have the information that actually serves them to go have a happy adulthood and enjoy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I love that a theme that keeps coming up, I think, in your book and in what you talk about is just celebration. You're celebrating life.
Yes.
You're loving it. You're bringing the mystery of it, the numinous side. This the part that says this is an amazing universe. I don't need to look up at the universe and think, oh, the stars are beautiful. Yahweh put them there, or some other God. I can just stop with that sentence. These stars are beautiful, magnificent. I love the fact that I get to breathe in and breathe out and enjoy this life, and the privilege of making it better for the next generation and leaving it, taking hopefully some of the traditions that we can carry on and making them better, and giving people more information like we talked about, but also some of them that it's time to move on from some of them and leave things as much as we can better, so the next generation has a much better chance of really being able to enjoy their one life, in my opinion, their one life here to the best of their ability and just to thrive. I think I see, as I read your book, I see so much in it that just says, just thrive, just, this is a beautiful life. Don't let the other stuff, the voices that try to say, oh, if it's only, you can only be glad and happy if you do it my little narrow way or my little narrow thought, thrive, enjoy it, celebrate it. And I love it. Thank you so much for that. And I'll pass back to you to say, is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
No, I would just say that, for those of us who, love traditions and love rituals and celebrations, I think that there's so much that we can do without feeling bound and beholden to belief systems that maybe don't hold water anymore. And I think that as we hopefully come out of this long period of isolation and quarantine, we can find new ways to celebrate and create new traditions and carry on the old ones we love, and think of it, with a new renewed appreciation.
Yeah, absolutely. Great way to put it. And to wrap up again with a plug again, for Small Creatures Such as We from Sasha Sagan, please go pick it up, take a read. It's a fun book to read. And honestly, I kind of found myself hearing your dad's voice, which I didn't know him in real life, but from the videos, I was reading it with your dad's voice at parts, but which is really cool.
Thank you. That's so nice. Thank you so much, Tim.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for writing it. And thank you for sharing some of your insights today. It's been really good to hear your thoughts on this stuff, and keep it up. We so appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.